Oh, and good evening. It's December 31st, 2024. We're continuing our discussion collection in our Outside the Class series. This series is from the Bible Project, but it covers the entire TaNaK, right? The Old Testament. On TheDustyFeet.com, in the Outside the Class section, those source videos are set up for your review. Because the intent of Outside the Class is for you to listen to that in-class lecture first. Those lectures can be found in the source video playlist. We try to keep these to about 15 minutes or so, probably because we want to make them easy to catch up on. So we're on a quest, scroll by scroll, book by book, a journey through this collection, but with a fun and different twist on Outside the Class, on the Dusty Feet. And before we forget it, if you find these kinds of podcasts useful, please click the subscribe button. The reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, that's when you click that like button, because that is how YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. Because in this series, we're going to cover the entire TaNaK, the Old Testament, in the original order of the collection, the Hebrew Scriptures order. As we pass the first 5, things could get interesting. Just remember, the videos that we're going to discuss, they're just the tip of an iceberg. They're part of a learning series that I highly recommend, and they can all be found on the Bible Project website. Link is in the description below. Because we're going to ask many questions about all kinds of things. Answers? We'll see. Yehoshua, Part 2. So, maybe how Tim broke out the scroll of Joshua into the sections that he has, we'll approach these discussions from that direction, right? Each section will be taken separately. So let's start with chapters 1 through 5. So the beginning of the scroll, it mentions a chain of command passing. And Joshua is now the person that they're going to be listening to. It's interesting. I like their response to Joshua, the call he sent, and I like how the people had their response to Joshua's call. Joshua told the leaders they were ready to go into the land, go talk to the people. Joshua had kept his promise to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, right? He told them, your wives, your children, all your belongings can stay this side of the Jordan. But he reminded them that you promised to go across to fulfill your promise. Then you can come back. I like this. I don't know if this is inherent faith or it's just an understanding. But we have this point where we have them say, leave them behind. We're going to go attack. So God gets to protect these people. He gets to protect them. There's no army left behind to handle things. God, he has that full responsibility of protecting them. Because while they're off to war, nobody will duck around behind their backside and cause issues. God, he gets to protect them. But there's this response that people's given, and it seems they want to treat Joshua like they treated Moses, and it's interesting because I'm unsure whether that's good or bad. I think it's a good thing. I do. I think it's a good thing. It's just something to mull. Because here's what they said. They answered Joshua, saying, all that you've commanded us, we will do. Whatever you send us, wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Anyone who rebels against your command and does not obey your words in all that you command him, he shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. It interests me that they assume that they've listened to everything that Moses has said, right? We know from the stories that there's some disparity in that particular way of remembering. Still, the truth is they are where they are now, and they want to listen to what Joshua has to say. especially looking back in reference to Moses. That look back is the key. Oh, and did you find it intriguing that the words that they used were, "May the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses"? Maybe it's just a perspective thought. I'll be the first to admit, it just hits me that when we look at it, they said your God, when your God will do this, not our God, right? Not this is our God. May our God continue to guide you. You see where I'm going with that? Just something to think about. Just the terminology was interesting to me. We'll move on. So in this section, we have the famous approach, the approach to Jericho's story, right? In the first 5 chapters, we see the approach getting ready to go to Jericho because there's a lot that happens here. Joshua sends 2 spies to investigate, like he said, just like Moses had sent the 10 in. But depending how you read the story, they may not have done particularly well as being spies because they're found out. It's kind of funny. They get into the city and we get this, and suddenly we get this person rushing to the king. There's spies here. Then you don't have to go looking about the city. They say, go to Rahab's house, the harlot. That's where they're at. So there's going to be a lot of flashbacks in these stories as we look. Okay, there'll be echoes of things that we might have seen or heard before, and I think they just want to remember that as we roll forward through this. Because we had something like this before. So we ask ourselves, did it turn out well? Did it turn out not so well? I think these are the questions that we ask when we see these echoes, when we see these connected thoughts. And there's a couple in this Rahab story. One is when the thought of the 2 messengers who went to see Lot. This was mine. So I thought of from the Abraham story. And so the people rushed over. They knew they were there with Lot, these people, and they knew it wasn't a secret. They'd already been there. And there's listening to instructions, but that'll echo way down. It was known to somebody. In this story, we have something similar. They're not part of the rest of the group. They're found out, and somebody went to the king and said, hey, these guys are from them, the stories we've heard about, right? And they're with that harlot, Rahab. It's fascinating because there's an opposite side to this. I mean, she knows somebody's coming. So in other words, there's a flip that we see in movies. Sometimes you're right. Someone finds out that the good or bad guys are on their way somewhere. So they're on their way. And then somebody tells those good guys or bad guys that they're on their way. And this is where Rahab has her conversation. And I'm going to introduce a thought that one might not sometimes consider. I think it's an upside down thought on this, a different perspective than what's traditionally talked about. And so it hit me this way, studying this section for this particular time, looking in the direction that they're at, the people in the story, and as everything unfolds, what's happening in their current time and how they thought to them, right? Rahab agrees to hide them. She does a good job with plausible distraction. People sometimes consider this the first time Rahab has embraced the God of Israel. I think there's a thought process to that. However, any God's perceived ability to demonstrate themselves, that's a part of what draws them to them. Back then, and throughout history, right, might makes right was part of the equation, right? Who had the power had the right. So here's Rahab's response to the spies. She's housed them, and her request, we're going to hear an echo from that from the past, and I don't think that's coincidental. But Rahab goes and echoes a point that I think is just, in the beginning anyways, a belief in the fear that whatever God is with these people is something, a God to be reckoned with. And so she says, hey, because of this God that we hear about, she knows nothing about him at all. So I'm not really compelled that she's chosen to follow this God, but she's asking for mercy from this God. Okay? It's in Joshua chapter 2. We'll start at verse 8. It said, So now before they laid down the spies, she came up to talk to them on the roof, and she said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we've heard how the Lord dried up the water from the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, right? To Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And when we heard it, our hearts melted, and had no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. The Lord your God, he is the God in heaven above and the earth beneath. So now therefore, please swear to me by the Lord, since I've dealt kindly with you, that you also you're going to deal kindly with my father's household. Give me a pledge of truth. Spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters, with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. So the men said to her, Our life for yours if you do not tell this business of ours, and it shall come about, when the Lord gives us the land, that we'll deal kindly and faithfully with you. So that's when she let them down through a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall, so that she was living on the wall. And she said to them, Go to the hill country, so that the pursuers will not happen upon you. Hide yourselves there for 3 days until the pursuers return here, and then afterward you can go on your way. And the men said to her, We shall be free from this oath from which you have made with us, unless, when we come into the land, you tie this cord of scarlet thread to the window through which you let us down. Gather to yourself into the house your father and your mother and your brothers and all your father's household. And it shall come about that anyone who goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be free. But anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head, if a hand is laid on him. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be free from the oath from which you've made us swear. And she said, According to your words, so be it. So she sent them away. They departed. She tied the scarlet cord in the window. Echoes. We have a red marking on an opening, and the promise, if this marking is seen, all in the house will be spared death. The promise is that anyone who's inside the house will be spared. As long as the instructions are followed, life will be given. If I may be bold, I think this has a relatively strong connection to the Passover. I trust you can see it. 3 days later, the spies returned to Joshua. They were given all the information. The new generation is prepared for entry, and it included circumcision. We've seen this happen several times. It seems to be a consistent theme. This is how you prepare. This is part of the commitment. You promised to follow Joshua's instructions. Joshua implored you to follow God's instructions, including circumcision. This is for those who wish to align themselves with this God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all the blessings that go with it. So that connection gets us to the point where we have in chapter 5, where they enter the land. And if you notice in the chapter, they had their first Passover there. So I can think if there was any doubt about the previous connection, I think that just ties a little bow around it. So we still have to wrap up that little section because we have manna again. But this time, it stopped. After they ate off the land that they're going into, they had some of its produce. The manna stopped. Prepare to enter the land. You agreed to live with this place. And with that, now comes enjoying the fruits of that land. Yeah. There's a lot more to follow. So that wraps up the first section that Tim talked about. And we had chapters 1 through 5, and we're going to prepare next week to jump into the next section. So be sure to listen so that you know where we're at. And thank you for being with us tonight on another edition of Outside the Class on the Dusty Feet.